This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at Sailor 50 States, Texas. I'll do a writing sample on Tomoe River paper using a variety of pens and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.5 stub nib. Then I'll take a look at a writing sample that I did previously on 20-pound copy paper. I'll compare Texas to similar inks from my collection, and finally I'll show you the results of my water resistance test. Now, the first writing sample I always do is with my glass dip pen, and I do my swatches with my tweezers. Now, I did this writing sample on my ink card first, my Tsubame ink card, and I had a little trouble with the ink wanting to come off the glass nib. It had trouble grabbing the paper, and so I would turn it, and then when it did come off, it came off pretty heavily and then got lighter, and then I had to re-dip the pen to write Texas. When I was doing my ink swatches with the tweezers, I had a little trouble with the ink not wanting to grab onto the paper, so I was a little bit concerned about how the ink was going to perform in a pen. So let's take a look at some writing samples with the pens. I'm going to begin with a Pilot 78G Plus with an extra fine stainless steel nib. Now, I've been looking forward to trying this ink. You can see right here, there looks like there could be some nice shading, and there's some sheen on that little end of the swatch. That feels surprisingly smooth in this extra fine nib. Wow. I'm impressed. The legibility is pretty decent. I think I'm going to go ahead and put smooth on this. Now, for people who typically use medium and broad nibs, you probably will not feel like this is smooth, but people like me that like to use extra fine and fine nibs, that's pretty nice. Next, I've got a Sailor Pro Gear Slim with a 14 karat fine nib. I have to say, it feels like there's more feedback on this fine nib, this Sailor fine nib. It feels drier than the Pilot nib did. It looks nice, and this is, I would call this feedback. It's not scratchy or anything, it's not digging into the paper, but there is a significant amount of feedback. I'm just going to say that it feels dry. Next, I've got a Sailor 1911 Standard with a 14 karat medium nib. Alright, this is much better. There's still some feedback, but you can just feel that the nib is broader, and it makes it not feel as dry. There's like a cushion of ink. And you can hear the nib on the paper if you like that sort of thing. Again, this medium nib feels like the Kaweco Perkeo. You can hear the nib on the paper, and there's some feedback, but it's not unpleasant. I'm going to put, this one was nice. Next, I've got a Pilot Custom 74 with a 14 karat fine nib. Alright, this is smoother. Yep. So I'm getting the fine line like I got with the Pro Gear Slim, but it's a little bit wetter like the 1911 medium. See, they look similar. And it's just a bit smoother. I'm going to put smooth on this one. That was nice. Next, I have a Twisby Mini with a fine steel nib. It occurred to me that I haven't been using my Twisby Mini much. That's pretty nice. This was a pen that I used quite a bit before I retired. I would use it at school. It was one of the pens I like to use for grading papers. This is nice and smooth. Not quite as wet as, it's not even as wet as the Pro Gear Slim. That's kind of surprising. But the nib is, there's a little bit more tipping, so you don't need as much ink to give you a cushion. That's pretty nice. Next, I've got a Pilot Metropolitan with a cursive medium steel nib. Nice and smooth. I was wondering if this was going to feel dry. Yeah, some nice shading. Next is a Kaweco Lilliput with a double broad steel nib. It's fun to watch the ink kind of pool up in different areas with this double broad nib. It's enjoyable. And finally, I've got a Jinhao X750 with a 1.5 stub replacement nib. While that dries, let's take a look at the 20-pound copy paper. I was surprised at how enjoyable these pens were to write with on the copy paper. Now, the Pro Gear Slim, again, felt a little dry, and the Pilot Custom 74 felt a little too wet. Both of those were just relative to the other pens. The other pens were just very enjoyable to write with. It didn't bleed through too bad except for the wider nibs, which that's not unusual. The only thing that takes away from this ink on copy paper is that it flattens it out. I mentioned with the Kaweco Double Broad that it was just so satisfying to see how the ink would pool up in different areas. It did that when I was writing on the copy paper also, and I was thinking as I was writing, hey, this is going to have some nice shading on this copy paper. But once the ink soaked into the paper and dried, it just flattened it out. So nothing overly spectacular about how it looks on copy paper, but it is pleasant to write with. One of the things that excited me about this ink when I first saw people starting to swatch it was that it reminded me of SBRE Brown, Ackerman SBRE Brown. It's got little bits of sheen and the shading, and so that was one of the first things I did was compare it to my sample of SBRE Brown. Now, SBRE Brown is a little bit more orange, but the shading that you get is similar. Just the behavior of the ink coming out of the nib and on the page is similar, but it is a little more orange. And Colorverse Golden Record is in that same color family, I would say, and behaves similarly, but Golden Record doesn't seem to have the sheen that these two do. And like the SBRE brown, it leans a little more orange. Cafe Crema is another one that has nice shading properties. It also has a little bit of sheen, but it leans a little more yellow. Colorverse Jupiter Flyby is a little more just true brown, maybe I would say. It looks like it has a little bit of gray in it and possibly even a little bit of pink. It came in the same set of inks that Golden Record came in. Monteverde Moonstone looks similar to Jupiter Flyby, but it's not quite as pink. It's got some shading, but has a little bit of a gray look to it. These are the browns from my collection. I was impressed by the water resistance test. As I was watching the ink come up off the page, it looked like some yellow maybe was lifting up off the page, and I thought it looked like this was gray that was being left behind, but it may actually be purple. You can tell by the halo around the letters it looks a little purple. So purple and yellow, I think, doesn't that make brown? But some decent water resistance, even in the extra fine. You can see, you can recover your notes if they get wet. Okay, on our Tomoe River paper, there's some show through. It's a darker ink. I don't see any areas that were in danger of bleeding through. There's a slight amount of sheen. There's in the scribble where some ink was laid down pretty heavily, it looks like, let's see, there's a halo of sheen and a halo of darker ink. It's a nice looking ink in a variety of nibs, and I was impressed with the performance in that extra fine. As long as you've got a decently wet writer, even in a very fine nib, it's pleasant to use. Let's see. I'm not seeing much sheen in the writing, other than I'm seeing a little bit on the Sailor 1911 medium and the Pilot Custom 74. Those are both somewhat wetter writers. Sailor Texas may be a suitable substitute, at least for me, for Ackerman SBRE Brown. Alright, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.